Hey guys, I promise you a bunch of mini reviews with a haul, and I am here to make good on that promise. I read a lot for one of my classes in particular this year. It was Children's and Young Adult Fantasy and Sci-Fi, i.e. everything that I am, personally. And I read a lot. You can actually just see the stack off camera right here. I'm in a sitting position, but I mean, it's up to my shoulders. There's 26 books right here, and in order to move along with this video somewhat, I have limited myself to the ones that I have in physical copy because there were more that I read for class, but I got them either from the library or I got them in an ebook form. So I don't really care too much about the ones that I didn't get. So I'm not gonna super talk about them and miss much, but I really did just want to go through like what a canonical group of texts are for children's fantasy and sci-fi, because while I definitely expected some of them, I did not expect some others, so I'm really excited to go through them all. I would group them back together by class and stuff, but we'd be here forever, so I'm just gonna get into it, and you'll probably see some things that you're really familiar with. There are a few books that I've read before, but some of them were definitely surprises to me. So, here we go. First book, Grasshopper Jungle by Andrew Smith. This is arguably one of the worst books I read for this class, let alone read the entire year, and it made my video, like I said, of the worst 5 books that I read in 2017, and I really go into this book there, so I don't want to repeat myself, but just, oh my god, this book was such a slog to read. The main character is annoying, the story is cringeworthy, there's a lot of things that make adolescent boys arouse, and I just didn't get into it at all. But it is a Prince Honor book, so, you know, go figure. Next we have a book that I did not know of before the start of this class, but the top of it is blurbed by Lemony Snicket, so you know it's going to be good, and it is Mermaid in Chelsea Creek by Michelle T. This is about a girl in Chelsea, Massachusetts who has magical powers and doesn't know it yet, but she is the girl ordained to bring all of the badness out of the world, and she knows this because she likes to eat salt. And there are mermaids involved, obviously, but actually the emphasis is more on the girl's story, not the mermaids. And there's some interesting things it says about sexuality and gender in here as well. And it's mostly a book about the environment and how the ways that we are damaging our environment is damaging our own mental and emotional health. So if that is something that you're interested in, I would definitely check this out. For this class, I also finally got around to reading a book by Ndende Okafor. She's best known in YA circles for Akata Witch and Akata Warrior, which just came out, but Shadow Speaker is one of her first novels, and is one that's actually usually shelved in adult sci-fi fantasy, despite having a teen protagonist. Go figure, I don't know, it's mostly out of print at this point. But this main character is a girl named Ijai, and she is a shadow speaker, which means that the shadows in the world actually talk to her. Problem is that she's not too great with her talent, but it falls to her to save her people from the brink of extinction and learn how to use her powers and learn that the struggle for good and evil doesn't mean black and white things like she thinks that it does. So I enjoyed this a lot as well. So again, if African science fiction is your thing or you want to expand to that, you need something different for a reading challenge, I would heartily recommend this one. If you are into fairy tales, then you should read, if you haven't already, Crumbs by Anne Ursu. This is the story of Hazel, whose best friend Jack is kidnapped by an ice witch after getting a mirror shard stuck in his eye, and this book is a great story on its own, but it's also filled with name drops of all of these really fantastic, mostly fairy tale, but some other pop culture references that all come together and make a really rich story that imagines these fairy tales in a way that's sometimes very different from the norm, sometimes very traditional, but also inverts a lot of them to subvert your expectations. So And again, the whole thing is playing off of what your expectation of a fairy tale is and trying to always, you know, circumvent that. So if you love fairy tales, if you've read a lot of them, reading this book is a really fantastic, just like, oh, I get that reference, I get that reference, I get that reference, and it's just a beautiful story as well. So this is the second time I've read Breadcrumbs, and I love it every single time. So if you're a fairy tale geek like me, Breadcrumbs. I also read for this class Sweet Whisper's Brother Rush by Virginia Hamilton. At one point this was a book that like everybody read, but it's kind of fallen out of favor, and it's one of the reasons why we read it for class. But it is about a girl named Teresa who has a ghost in her house who is trying to tell her some very interesting secrets about her family, and also her mentally ill brother Dab, who she has to take care of because her father is gone and her mom is trying to take care of them, so she's never home. So it's a lot about family, but also class and of course color. Virginia Hamilton is an African-American writer, and that really is just infused in this story. So it's a very much African-American tale of family and working class, that kind of a thing. Also ghosts. So, you know, if that's something you're into, there's Sweet Whispers Brother Rush. So believe it or not, besides For Good Omens, I've never read another Terry Pratchett novel until this year, when for class we read the amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents. This story is, in case you're not aware, about Maurice, who is this cat right here, and he has some rat friends, and he's basically taught them how to be the rats that give birth to the Pied Piper myth. And it's a con that they go around running to get fed and get money, with this little boy who's helping them out and literally has no idea what's going on. It's all Maurice's plan, but they go to one town and the plan goes very, very haywire, and they end up having to actually save the town from an infestation of things that are maybe rats. So it's really funny, it's really witty. It didn't make me want to immediately go read everything Terry Pratchett's ever written, but it did let me know that Terry Pratchett would be someone worth reading if I got along to it. I also, believe it or not, have never read a full Ursula K. Le Guin novel, which is, again, a terrible, terrible mistake on my part, but for this year we read A Wizard of Earthsea. It's the first book in the Earthsea Chronicles, and this is the little teen mass market, but I now know why a lot of people say if you liked Harry Potter, read these, or vice versa. If you liked these, then read Harry Potter. These were before Harry Potter. So it is about Ged, who is a great sorcerer. He goes off to magic school and makes some mistakes. And what I like about Ged as opposed to Harry Potter is that the story is really because he screwed up and he has to find himself and be a better person. So it's about how even though you have all of this magic at your disposal, just because you're magical and you're like this chosen one doesn't mean that you're a good person unless you make good choices. So that was really refreshing to feel like the school narrative was actually being used to explore different questions than just like, I'm going to magic school. I have also never before in my life, before this semester, finished a J.R.R. Tolkien book. I know that's awful, but I tried to read A Lord of the Rings and I got so bored. I love the movies, but I got so bored. But I did finally, for this class, read The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And again, I mean, I'm not gonna actually go around giving this to children because I was still fairly bored. I'm sorry if J.R.R. Tolkien's your thing, but we all know high fantasy is not mine. So, it's good. I'm glad I read it. I know I don't have to tell you the story behind it, but like, Lord have mercy, high fantasy just makes you want to fall asleep every time. This repackaged cover doesn't necessarily show this, but The Five Children and It by E. Nesbit is actually a really, really influential early children's fantasy text. It is about 5 children who find a Samiad in a sand dune. A Samiad is like a sand fairy. It's kind of ugly looking, but it grants wishes. And it's basically about how these kids keep wishing for things that get them in trouble. And they can't realize that they're wishing for the wrong things. And it's you know, a traditional story that teaches children about good values and stuff like that, but it's one of the first pseudo-fantasy texts for children. So if you want to know what some really early influences look like, then there's The Five Children and It by E. Nesbit. Did you know there's a movie coming out about Wrinkle in Time? Because it's all over my Barnes & Noble. Every day. All day. Wrinkle in Time. I did reread that again for class this year. Again, not going to go into that so much because I'm sure you have some inkling of A Wrinkle in Time. This is my second or third time reading it, but again, just gotta show up in the hall because I have the book. Speaking of early children's fantasy books that I've never heard of about in my life, there's The Perilous Guard by Elizabeth Marie Pope. This started off as like a historical fiction that I was really excited about because like Queen Elizabeth I, before she's Elizabeth I, shows up in the beginning and I was like, oh my god, this is gonna be like a Tudor historical. It wasn't. In the beginning, Kate gets taken away from Elizabeth because her sister can't keep her mouth shut, and she ends up at this super creepy castle up in the Highlands, and there are fairies, and the fairies don't want nice things, and she ends up having to untangle a murder mystery while she's up there. So again, I had never heard of this, but in terms of some of the first children's fantasy-esque novels that are old and were influential. Again, this was a Newbery Honor book way back when. It's one of the reasons we read this as well. I was really, really pumped to finally get around to reading a book that's been on my list for a while, and that is Where the Mountain Meets the Moon by Grace Lynn. This is the story of a girl named Min Lee who lives in a farming village, a poor farming village with her parents, and they don't have enough money, they don't have enough to survive, and so she goes on a journey to meet the old man in the moon. I almost said the old man in the mountain, which is not the same. The old man of the moon, to have him grant a wish to give her family more prosperity. Along the way she meets a dragon who has difficulty flying, and he also wants to be able to have this old man in the moon grant his wish to fly. So they team up together and they go on this epic quest, and this again is a Newbery Honor book. I had been looking forward to reading it for a very long time and just never had the time, so I was really glad to get the chance this time. It was very, very worthwhile to read, and also Grace Lynn did a bunch of art in this, and the art is just super gorgeous, so definitely pick this up, and I'm really glad that I own it now as well. So you guys might know that this book like existed, but I'd never heard of it before, even though it's apparently super popular and like influential for children. I don't know. It's Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH by Robert C. O'Brien. I had never heard of this before, but apparently it's like a big deal. But it's about Mrs. Frisby, a field mouse, and summer is coming and her son is sick, so they can't move out of their little burrow, which is right in the plowing field. So they get some help from the Rats of NIMH and find out this whole story behind her husband, who's recently been murdered by a cat. And it was very weird. It was very weird, but very fun. But apparently it's this big, popular children's book that I guess I just missed somehow. Do I need to explain why? It's Charlotte's Web. Carrying on. Also, another book that was apparently popular at one point that I missed, The Children of Greene Know by L.M. Boston. This is about a boy named Tolly who goes to live with his grandmother in Greene Know, or Greene Noah, depending on how you want to pronounce this. There are the ghosts of the 3 children who originally lived there who are haunting the place because it turns out that Greene Noah got its name from a demon named Greene Noah who was still on the premises. Which makes this sound way scarier than the book actually is, but whatever. That's The Children of Greene Know. Greene Noah. Whatever. We did a couple of books that related to time travel across several different weeks, but one of the most interesting ones that we read was Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pierce. This is about a boy named Tom, and he has been sent to live at his aunt and uncle's because his brother Peter has contracted the measles. I want to say the chickenpox, it's the measles. And he's being quarantined because he hasn't gotten the measles yet, and he lives out in the country, but his aunt and uncle live in the city, and they don't have a garden, and they just have like this back door that empties out into a disgusting little alley. But when Tom goes to sleep, he discovers that the back door leads to a garden where he meets a girl named Hattie, and they become friends. But every single time he goes to the door, Hattie changes. There's a different period of time, and it becomes clear that when he goes through the door and into the garden, he's traveled back in time. And it ends up having some very interesting ways of conceiving time travel. So if you're into like older children's fiction that says weird things about time travel, this one's good. So I don't know if you were like me when you were younger and read like every single thing Eva Ibbotson wrote, but I was really excited for this semester to get back to The Secret of Platform 13 by Eva Ibbotson. So the disturbing thing is that on the rebooted covers of this, School Library Journal is quoted as saying, Eva Ibbotson is perfect for fans of Harry Potter. This was written before Harry Potter, and if you read this having read Harry Potter, you start to wonder and hope that J.K. Rowling didn't read this, because there are parts of this that smack a lot of Harry Potter, and it's very concerning. But I love Eva Ibbotson. My favorite is still Witch Witch, but this was one that we read for class, specifically talking about, plagiarism versus creative borrowing in terms of Harry Potter, and I just love it a lot. It's really cute, and if you haven't read Eva Ibbotson but you like cute children's fiction, you should do that. We also read Astrid Lindgren's Pippi Longstockings. Fairly certain I don't have to explain this to you, so we're just gonna carry on. Also read C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, first book in the Chronicles of Narnia series, or second, depending on who you ask. For me, it's still number 1, but whatever. I don't have to explain this book's plot to you either. Moving on. Also, Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You may have seen either of the movies. I hope you've seen the Gene Wilder one, if you haven't read the book. Moving on once again. Moving towards the more YA side, we read Eliadon Johnson's The Summer Prince. This book is about an artist named June who meets and falls in love with a boy named Enki, who has just been elected as her society's summer prince. Queens hold the real power, and kings are elected, and summer princes are elected basically as puppets to hold the line. And she meets up with Enki, and they decide that they want to do something with her art to really make a difference instead of just being a puppet. That being said, there's also a lot in here about sexuality, about technology versus nature, about class, about race. It's just about ageism, actually, is tackled in this as well. So there's a lot in this slim little volume that you don't expect. So if you're like me and put this on your TBR when it came out and then never got around to it, I do recommend picking up a copy, because I'm so mad there isn't a sequel. I'm so mad. We also read Catherine Howe's Conversion. This is a super spooky tale that puts a story about the Salem witch trials vis-a-vis a more typical story about a girl trying to deal with high school, and the symptoms that stress can cause, and what girls and boys will do to come out on top when faced with a very stressful competition, stuff like that. And yeah, it was super spooky, and I wasn't a super fan just because I don't like super spooky, but if you like spooky and the Salem witch trials, then maybe you should read it, because you'll be interested. Speaking of super spooky and not at all into, Midwinter Blood by Marcus Sedgwick is a reincarnation story told backwards. There are these two lovers who are separated by a blood ritual that kills them both, and they reincarnate and keep trying to find each other, and this is the story of their connected reincarnations. And it is spooky, it is melancholic, and the one thing I will say about it is that it didn't end the way I expected it to. So if you're interested in something like that, super spooky, ignore the cover. The cover is ugly as heck. I am so glad this class got me to read so many books that I was interested in reading. One of them being The House of the Scorpion by Nancy Farmer. I've heard so much about this book, and I finally got my hands on it. If you don't know, House of the Scorpion is a story about a boy named Matt who is brought up in a very weird way, and he all of a sudden realizes that he is a clone of one of the most influential drug dealers in this dystopian Central America world that he lives in. And it's way weird and interesting and has a lot of things to say about the nature of humanity and choices, nature versus nurture, all that kind of stuff. There's a reason it won so many awards, although I wasn't like super thrilled with it, but yeah, finally glad I got to read this. And then last but not least, we have Diana Wynne Jones's A Tale of Time City. If you want a book that does time travel justice in a way that I've never seen a book do time travel justice, read A Tale of Time City. I am so glad that I finally got around to reading a Diana Wynne Jones, because not only does she have an idea of how books should work and stories should work, she has a real grasp on her science fiction elements, which is absolutely fantastic. The story is about a girl named Vivian Smith who is taken out of her time in London 1939, right before World War. And she thinks that she's being kidnapped, but her two kidnappers are two boys from Time City, this timeless city in the middle of, basically, if you think of time as a wheel, they're the center spoke of it all. And they think that they can save America, you know, the whole world, if they get rid of this girl named Vivian Smith. And it turns out they get the wrong Vivian Smith, but she is now embroiled in their attempt to try and find Vivian Smith, who's running around at a bunch of different times. So again, very interesting. I loved it a lot. It was complicated as all get out, but once you get your head around it, you really respect it. So sorry this was a bit longer than I intended, but I did have a lot of books to go through. Hopefully you saw one or two things in there that maybe caught your interest. If you have any questions, want to hear further thoughts, let me know down in the comments. If you've read some of these, if you've wanted to read some of these, again, just, you know, hit me up for a chat. I'm sorry, I'm looking at this big pile of mess that I've made here now, and I really don't want to pick it up. So I'm gonna go edit this video instead. See you next time, guys. Bye.